And we are joined now by two of the members of the Fordham Bargaining Committee, Marshawn Brewer, who is on the line on the phones with us, and Mark Himmelstein, who we have over video. Thank you guys so much for coming on and speaking with us today.
Thanks so much, Emma. We really appreciate you having us on.
For sure. So, Marshawn, I'll start with you here. For our viewers who might not be aware of what's happening at Fordham, hundreds of graduate student workers have walked out this week amid contract negotiations with the school. Can you give us like a quick rundown of how you, one, came to form a union last May, and also how it got to the point that a walkout in this way was so necessary?
All right. Yeah. So a quick synopsis is, I'm a second year, so I kind of jumped in my first year with the organizing effort, just helping out on the side. I never expected to get pushed into the forefront like this. But it really started basically COVID. COVID was the genesis of the union, the working conditions during COVID, the fact that people were feeling disrespected by the administration during COVID, and the lack of resources really to cope with the conditions that they were under. Our friend Kieran, who really pushed the union forward in the initial stages, is now a union organizer in his own right, doing other things. He really ignited the union, and basically we've gone from there. In terms of like why we have, we won our election last year also by a huge margin. So we won by like 95% of the vote. So it was really a resounding victory. But why we're actually at the point now where we have to do a walkout pertains to the inertia of the administration when it comes to bargaining. So we have not been bargaining with them to faith. They basically want to stick to the status quo in almost every single form of negotiation. And so we really had no other option to push the momentum of the negotiations forward, but to really start a campaign where we show that we can withhold our labor. It's not the tactic that we desire to use most of all, but it's a necessary tactic in order for us to get the leverage we need in order to get the contract that is necessary.
And Mark, how inspired have you all been by seeing some of the major actions by graduate student workers unions around the country? This seems to be a real kind of explosion within academia that, we're really excited over here from our perspective, but from you guys on the ground, how much has that bolstered your resolve really to get to a point where you're going to walk out, and that walkout started on Monday?
Oh, it's huge. It's been, like you mentioned, it's been a movement that's, really been sort of an avalanche since we won recognition from the NLRA as actual employees before that, before 2016, before that decision. It wasn't clear whether we were formally considered employees. And so since then, there's been just this huge wave of unionization. And just to speak to, I think, what you mentioned, which is these issues in academia as an industry where, folks like at the bottom rung, like grad workers, like adjuncts, like postdocs, we're the ones who make these universities run. And people have this perspective of college life in America, or university life as this ivory tower. And, we're not in the ivory tower. We're in the basement of the ivory tower. And we're getting by on $30,000 a year living in New York City. Is that like a lot of us aren't allowed to even earn more than that? It's just, I don't know how anyone can see that as a tenable situation that can keep going. And so we're really hoping that we're part of a larger movement that's just going to not just change life at Fordham, but change the academic job industry just in general.
Well, the cost of living is so key here, and housing, I know, has been central in terms of what you guys have been organizing, or part of your organizing effort. Marshawn, can you talk a bit about that? Because I live here in Brooklyn. I understand the cost of living is out of control, and those numbers that you just laid out, Mark, that seems like it's impossible to live, especially if you're precluded from making wages elsewhere.
Well, the housing situation is so drastic because we have to understand that the university is also, a lot of its labor comes from international students. And many of them come here without the requisite kind of paperwork necessary because of the way the visa process works for them to get a house. So sometimes international students are basically homeless and relying upon other grad workers to basically supply housing for them. So that's one aspect of the housing situation. A secondary aspect is, we can't afford rent. So we have to live with multiple roommates. We have to figure out strange arrangements to get, guarantors and things of that sort. Like you almost have to either depend upon a wealthy benefactor, a wealthy member of your family, or basically depend upon like housing up with like 6 or 7 people whom you might not know. And so all of these factors are kind of impacting us. And this housing insecurity that we're dealing with impacts the way we can do our job. So if we're housing insecure, if we don't know where our next meal is coming from, if our situation is precarious, then we're not going to be able to produce the best teaching results for our students. And so we care about our students. We want to make sure that our security is also linked to their flourishing. You can't have a flourishing university if the people who are teaching a great deal of the classes for undergraduates are in a state of stress and housing insecurity.
Absolutely. And Mark, I mean, what has the administration's response been? If you could summarize it a bit, it seems quite acrimonious, or at least from their end, they've been pretty stubborn, forcing you guys into making this kind of decision to walk out. How have those talks gone, and what would you like our audience to know about what it's like to stand up honestly to an administration like this?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question in 2 ways. So the first way is what's happening at the bargaining table, where the best way to describe what's happening there is what we call surface bargaining. So essentially, they're just trying to run out the clock, break our spirit by moving as slowly as possible. As Sean mentioned, they haven't made a single proposal to us that, in our view, offers any improvement over the status quo. And we've been in bargaining for over 50 hours for 7-8 months. And so not a single proposal that they've made has acknowledged that we need change. It's just all been, they retain full discretion. They won't even, they've been haggling with us over what we call just cause, which is, the standard for which employees are often disciplined in these contracts. And they have this just cause contract, just cause clause in all of their other contracts, all their other union contracts, they have it, but they've been refusing to even put that term in the contract, which is just like, if you know anything about how these negotiations go, it's just such a perfect encapsulation of their bad faith. The flip side of that is that the public discourse around our union has been entirely one-sided. Until we did this walkout, the university seemed to not even want to acknowledge our existence. The public communications about us there just weren't any. And once we announced the walkout, since then, President Tanya Tetlow and Provost Jacobs at Fordham have started sending some communications about the union. It's obviously very hostile in tone for the most part. Tanya recently said on the news, she hopes to work with us on mutually beneficial solutions. And I find it so funny that she would say that, because these are words we've said at the table. And when we say them, they just kind of nod at us and then move on. And so they're taking our words and using them in public. We're perfectly happy to come up with creative solutions. We understand the university. We want our solutions to benefit the university. We're not here to take away from the Fordham community. We want to lift up the Fordham community. That's what we see our role as. And so just to hear that it was kind of both funny and ironic and infuriating.
And Marshawn, I mean, what's your sense of where the administration's priorities are here? Because, honestly, if the educational experience is supposed to be valuable for the students at Fordham, treating the people most responsible for that educational experience, frontline educators, right? What you guys are doing, interacting with students, supposedly, the human element of the educational experience. Where would you say their priorities are more focused? Because I'm trying to look up their endowment right now. My guess is they have some wiggle room to pay you guys fairly.
Well, first of all, it's $1 billion, Emma. So I'll give you the
there we go.
Right there. So you can, yeah, there you go. So secondarily, we have to look at what's happening at Fordham within the context of the neoliberalization, the labor flexibility process that has happened in America since Carter, going through Reagan. And the university are just basically embodying that same spirit. We're gig workers in education and academia. Okay, let's put it
right
to its most strict terms. Okay, and so the idea is that we go through this grueling process of training. We put our head down. We basically supplicate to the powers that be and the processes that have been, and eventually we have the opportunity, possibly at the end of the road, of getting a place in academia, a tenure track job, and so on and so forth. But what we're seeing with these unionization efforts in California, at Temple, at Rutgers, is that there's going to have to be a restructuring of the university in the same way there's going to have to be a restructuring of the general economy. Okay, the neoliberalization and labor flexibility that is bearing down on the entire country is bearing down upon us as well, and we are trying to make change in that. This is a project not only for academia, but for the broader left in general, and we are simply at a focal point of this larger battle, not only with economics, but as we see with Florida and DeSantis, with some cultural things as well.
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. That's going to be the next frontier, right? Essentially, places like, what is it, the New School in Florida, where they're replacing academics with essentially political goons. That's a whole different story on that front. But Mark, last question for you here. It's been 3 days since the walkout started, right? Do you have hope that some of what you are calling for is starting to be listened to and that the pressure is being felt on the administration at this point?
Yeah, actually, I do have a little bit of hope that it is. So the first day, so this was a 3-day unfair labor practice strike. So we've gone back to work now for now. This was sort of us showing them where we're at with this at the end of this spring semester and letting them know what might happen if they don't come to the table and work with us in good faith in the fall. But the first day of the walkout, we had a bargaining session, and it was amazing, just the experience of being in that bargaining room with 150 people behind me and their voices from the picket line pouring through the room. I could hear them we could hear them in the room. And for the very first time, we actually felt a little movement at the table. Like, I'm being dead serious. We haven't felt any movement at the table this entire time. And we felt it in two ways. The most salient way is we've had this battle over non-disclosure agreements where we're asking Fordham to stop using non-disclosure agreements to silence the complainants in cases of harassment and discrimination. And to date, their public messaging had been, "Oh, we don't do this to begin with. We won't do this." But they wouldn't promise us that in a contract. And they finally at this session agreed that they would ban them for members of our bargaining unit. Now, we don't think that's sufficient. We think they should not use them for anyone in the Fordham community. This is a health and safety issue in our view, where if anyone is being silenced about harassment and discrimination, this is a threat to the safety of everyone, including our bargaining unit members. So we think this is fair game for our contract to ban NDAs wholesale. They haven't done that yet, but they at least agreed to ban them for members of the bargaining unit. So that was a big move. They also finally started asking questions about our international student worker issues, which they hadn't. They were just rejecting our proposals, categorically rejecting them, no discussion. And they finally actually started proactively asking some questions. They haven't given us anything in writing. I'm not overwhelmingly optimistic that this is moving in a productive direction yet. But if they do follow through on their questions, I think it'll be a real sign that we've gotten somewhere and that they've heard our message and that they know what we're capable of as a union.
Well, guys, thanks so much for joining me, and thanks to my college roommate, freshman year roommate Nicola, who set this up, who's a part of your guys' bargaining unit here. I just want to see if there's a way that our audience can help, if there's a strike fund, or if there's any, I mean, obviously showing solidarity if you're in the New York City area, but financially, what could our audience do? And we can put a link to that kind of stuff in the podcast and YouTube descriptions.
We just launched a strike fund. We just announced it yesterday at the end of our walkout, and we'll absolutely send you that link, and that would be amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, for now, this is mostly for our hourly workers who walked off the job so bravely and are losing their wages for the last 3 days. Most of us are not hourly workers, and I don't think Fordham is going to try to take our wages away. If they do, so help them. But the hourly workers will, and that's why we launched it when we did, to make sure that they get made whole.
Okay, yes. We pre-recorded this interview, so by the time you guys are watching this, the links will be in the description below. Thank you guys both so much, Mark and Marshawn, of the Fordham Grad Workers Fordham Bargaining Committee, I should say. Really appreciate you both joining us today.
Thanks so much, Emma. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.